At the end of my drinking and using, there was no joy. And I tell the people that I talk to on the phone that I found a way, and the way was through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and through going to treatment, and that, if they're willing, they can put an end to that pain and suffering.
Hello, I am B. Reeves with New Waters Recovery in Raleigh, North Carolina. Welcome to our weekly podcast, Finding New Waters. Our goal in creating Finding New Waters is to provide a resource for families to help navigate the complexities of supporting a loved one struggling with substance use or mental health. When we find ourselves in crisis due to one of these issues, most people have no idea where to turn. We hope to shed some light onto what is often the darkest hour for many families. Thank you. All right. Welcome to another episode of Finding New Waters, the podcast we do here at New Waters Recovery in Raleigh, North Carolina. My name is B. Reeves. I'm the director of, let me start that over. I'm not the director of admissions anymore.
No, you are not.
Good God. You're our fifth one today, Gary. I'm slipping. All right. Welcome to another edition of Finding New Waters, the podcast we do here at New Waters Recovery in Raleigh, North Carolina. My name is B. Reeves. I'm the Director of Business Development at New Waters. I'm sitting here with our CEO, Justin McClendon. And then our very, very special guest today is Gary Fisher, who is the Director Emeritus at Cirque Lodge out in Utah. Welcome, Gary.
Thanks, B. Thanks, Justin. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gary. So just kind of out of the gate, Director Emeritus. You know, we talked about that the other day, but what does that look like, Gary?
So, we've laughed about it a little bit, but I tell people it's a fairly long title for a purely honorary role. But I had worked at Cirque. They opened in November of 1999, and I got there in February of 2000, actually March of 2000. And when I started, so I was the director there for 22 years before I retired. And I think that in some ways it was really a kind piece by the gentleman who owns the facility to kind of allow me to end my role, but allow me to continue being part of the lodge. And kind of, I think over the last couple of years, I've kind of acted as a brand ambassador for them. I go out, I think a lot of people still associate me with Cirque and Cirque with me. And so as a result, it's worked out. But Director Emeritus, I guess, it's just that I continue to use that role and go talk about recovery, talk about what we do up at Cirque Lodge and about recovery in general. I think that's been one of the great parts is that I no longer just speak about Cirque. I talk about, not that I think I ever did, but get to talk about the miracle of recovery, right? Miracle of getting sober in the middle of, or the miracle of restoring lives and families and careers. And so it's a pretty good role.
Yeah. You know what it tells me, because I've never seen that outside of a university's website, probably the Emeritus title. And what that tells me is that they really do love and respect you. And as we all do, everybody who knows you in the field and who's ever met you in the recovery world and beyond, but, and also coming from one of the most respected treatment centers in the country, if not the world, that's pretty high praise. And, I'll just say for Justin and people listening at home, I, had the pleasure of, I was on a golf work recovery cup golf trip with Gary last week in Oregon, and got to play with him on day one. And we drew our match, which we halved our match, which was, we were lucky to make that happen. We had a great time doing it. But then the next day, or maybe it was the next day after that, I got to see Gary pick up 38 years of sobriety at a meeting, which was really special to see that and be there. That's for amazing. That. How did you get there? What happened and what were you like and what happened and what are you like now a little bit?
Yeah, how long do we have? That's a long story. But, first of all, just to touch on, getting the opportunity to go play in the Recovery Cup and people, I think a lot of folks would think about it as getting together to go play golf. But the truth of the matter is I think for the industry people, it's the opportunity to get together in fellowship, right? Actually practice what we preach, stay connected. And I think that one of the diseases of addiction is it's just easy to get isolated, or one of the symptoms, I guess I should say, of addiction. It's just easy to get isolated. And I'm, as kind of the old guard in the field, right? I just believe it, it was like heartwarming for me, right? To see all these young guys get together and kind of carry on what hopefully the folks in my generation started. I can tell you, B and Justin, you guys would get a kick out of this, but when we started Cirque, right? So going back to 2000, if you were hanging out with other people, other business development people, just folks from other treatment centers, it was almost like you were cavorting with the enemy. And I think one of the things that are, was that theory of scarcity. It was that theory that, well, there's just not enough clients. And of course, we know how absurd that is with with just the epidemic of addiction and overdoses and things like that. So one of the things that I was very proud of, and it wasn't me per se, I hopefully I went out and participated, and I was a good participant, a good soldier, so to speak. But I've started that mall theory, right? That we're better together than we are alone. And so, that's, I think, what you guys were doing up at the Recovery Cup is just a continuation of that. And that was, like I said, that was fun for me to see. And I just don't know that, most of the folks out there can understand just how important that is, that we're better together than we are apart. As far as my story, I was a guy who, I really wasn't that guy who the very first time I ever had a cocktail, you'll hear about people talk about it and how it kind of just changed them from a cellular level, right? That it's kind of that warm feeling, the sky got bluer, they were, just life was better. And I don't think that was true for me, right? The big piece for me, I grew up in an area where I wasn't part of the predominant culture. And so for me, I was always kind of trying hard to fit in. And I think one day somebody said, hey, we're going to go up the canyon to go have a couple of beers. You want to go? And I think at that point, I think they were going to a keg. And the truth of the matter was, I didn't even know what a keg was, right? And but I was like, what I heard this guy say to me is, hey, let's go, we're going to go hook up. And I was like, right on, I'm with you, right? And so as a result, it allowed me to be part of. And so I was, and that kind of started my drinking career. And, and it really didn't matter if somebody said, hey, we're going to go out and try out for the baseball team. I was like, hey, right on. I'll come with you, and if it was go smoke dope behind the football stadium, I was like, okay, hey, right on, I'm with you. And I think a big part for me was that it was just part about trying to fit in, right? Part of the group. And it worked pretty well, right? And, and as I kind of went through this portion of my high school career and college career and actually had some success, I think the big part that started, you don't really have any fear until you have something. So, and then once you have something, whether it's a job, a reputation, a girlfriend, you get this fear of losing it. And I think that's what alcohol did for me, was it would tamp back that fear, that insecurity, that anxiety. And I took it a little too far. My father used to say, that I didn't really have a brake pedal. And, so if a little was good, a lot was better. And so So that kind of became the driving force. And as I continued to get more, I continued to have greater fears and greater anxieties. And as a result, my drinking and using increased until the part that it became fairly detrimental. And then in a fairly, I don't know, probably desperate move at the time, an effort to kind of right some wrongs. I got involved with some guys that, well, needless to say, it ended up with me being incarcerated. And, and I think that's the insidious thing about addiction and about, just, it starts out so simply, right? That's the insidious part. It's just whether it's your first drink that you ever have or it's your first drink on the way to a relapse, it's so simple. And then pretty soon it becomes so complex. And at any rate, ended up paying the penance for my deeds and, ended up getting out. And the truth of the matter is I couldn't get a job, right? Nobody wants to hire that convicted felon. They don't want to do that. And, I came back to Salt Lake City and it was one of those things that, of course, everybody has great intentions, right? But that's, all of a sudden I'd show up on their doorstep and I could see the look in their face. And I remember just saying, hey, don't worry about it. I'm good. And I ended up going back to a woman who had been a counselor for mine in treatment. I went to treatment to, not really to get sober. I went to treatment to try to mitigate the circumstances surrounding my crimes. And kind of an interesting piece is I remember sitting with her and I told her, I said, Linda, I said, I don't really want a job. I need a job. And that's how desperate I was to work. And I remember she hired me as the midnight to 8 person. I was the night clerk, and I was pretty thrilled, right? I was pretty thrilled to just have work. And kind of an interesting piece is that kind of move to where I was working the afternoon swing shifts and just pretty much making minimum wage. And one day this gentleman walked in and he said, it was a hospital-based recovery unit, and he said, "Who's Gary Fisher?" And the funny part is he had a suit on, right? And I was working at this little Catholic facility that still had nuns in it, and so this guy come walking in a suit, and I certainly he thought he was a law enforcement officer, and I'm not sure what I had done, but I was in more trouble, right? And but I sit there and very bravely raised my hand, and I said, "I'm Gary Fisher," and he said, "Can we go talk?" And I said, "Sure, been through this drill before, right?" And so at any rate, long story short, we go in and sit down, and he said, Gary, he said, when people call here to the facility, he said, what do you talk about? And I looked at him, and his name was Kaler. And I said, so Mr. Kaler, I said, I'm not sure what you mean. And he said, well, when people call and you talk with them on the phone, what do you talk about? And I said, I'm not sure where we're going. And he said, well, when people admit here, we ask, what brought them here? And he said, an inordinate amount of people are using your name to come here to the recovery unit. And I said, oh, well, that's a good thing, right? And he said, well, it can be. Just depends on what you're saying. And I said, oh. I said, well, I talk about joy. And he looked at me and he said, joy? And I said, yes, sir. I said, see, at the end of my drinking and using, there was no joy. And I tell the people that I talked to on the phone that I found a way. And the way was through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and through going to treatment, and that, if they're willing, they can put an end to that pain and suffering. And he looked at me and he said, what about the script? And kind of an interesting piece, you guys, is back in the early 90s, To tell you how much the business has changed, first of all, there weren't 24-hour admissions. The admissions people went home at 5 o'clock, so the phones rolled over to the guys on the unit. And typically the guy who had the most time, and that was me, and so that's the reason I picked up the phone. But Mr. Kaler looked at me and he said, well, what about the script? What about the admission script? I said, oh, sir. I said, I work in the evenings. I've never seen the script, but if you want me to read off of a script, I said, I'm happy to. And he said, he looked at me and he said, joy. And I remember saying, yes, sir, joy. And he said, well, thanks for your time. And he walked out, and a couple of days later, he walked back in and he said, you want a job? And I said, well, sir, I have a job. And he goes, he said, no, one that pays a little better. And I said, because we all know that working is the, the saints of the world, the line workers in a treatment center don't make a lot of money. And I said, well, I would love one. And I said, what would I do here? And he said, I'm going to put you in the admissions department. And I said, I remember saying to him, I said, and this is who we are as alcoholics and drug addicts, is that we really don't feel worthy, right? We're just happy to work. And he said to me, I said, Mr. Kaler, I said, I don't think I'm qualified to do admissions. And he said, you might be the only guy here who is. And that was kind of the start of that career. I got recruited a little bit later. Went to work for charter hospitals, which at the time was a very large behavioral health group, and worked for their facilities here in Salt Lake City. And then I kind of got a big break. I got recruited by a guy by the name of Mike Dussault, who ran a group here called Highland Ridge Hospital, which was owned by Pioneer Healthcare, which is today Acadia, for your listeners who are aware of Acadia. But, this was a guy who, he could take the most complex problems, you guys, and he could distill them. He could distill it down into the most simple terms. And Mike was really the guy that taught me how to run a treatment facility. And he wasn't teaching me per se as that I was his, that I was in some operations position. I mean, he was just teaching me by being an example. And, I will tell you that pretty much everything that we did at Cirque Lodge, at least while I was there, and pretty much probably still today, I don't think they probably veered from the course too far. I learned from Mike, and I learned from watching him and how he treated people. And, one of the things that'll be of interest to you guys, we always start the day, and, everybody was always worried about the patients, right? Always worried about the residents. And Mike was always worried about the staff, and because he knew inherently that if the staff was in a good spot, that they would give good treatment. As we say in the program, you can't give what you don't have. And so he was, those were his kids, right? Those were the people that he looked out for. And in doing that, we were able to then go out and look out for the residents. So anyway, that was kind of how I got there, right?
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. And thank you for sharing that. And you're right. I mean, that, we can only keep away. We obviously we can't transmit something we haven't got to, is the other part of that. And so, we do our best to make sure everybody is taken well care of, because like you said, that will be transferred and transmitted to the clients if we're doing things right ourselves. And that thing about joy, so many words that I have read and learned and uttered my whole life, I just didn't really know what they really meant until I got sober, and joy, I thought I knew what it meant, but joy now is not just being elated and happy because of some result or something I got or some girl or some, gift, but just being able to have joy doing whatever I'm doing, whether it's the mundane or something that I'm not excited about doing, and being able to get through everything kind of with a smile on my face. I mean, that's kind of how I look at joy now. And there's one thing I just would be remiss if I didn't bring up on this podcast, and that is what, I've misquoted Gary, and I'm going to make sure I say it right on this podcast too. But, we, in my role, I'm very fortunate that I get to go out and play golf, with people like Gary Fisher, and he has famously said to many people looking out on some beautiful sunset on a golf course or the like, look what we drank ourselves into. Am I saying that right?
You are saying it right.
But it's so true. And it doesn't just have to be on the golf. I mean, it's unbelievable how the life that I and we have today, and I wouldn't have it without, drinking and drugging myself almost to death, and it took that for me to kind of rise from the ashes like the phoenix and be able to and not only have this life, but really enjoy, operative piece of that word being joy, this life. So it's amazing.
Well, and one of the things that's kind of, I think it's important to talk about. And first of all, at least the very first place the very first person I would attribute that saying to about look what we drank ourselves into was a gentleman by the name of Chuck Marshanky. And Chuck, back in the day, he worked for Bradford, and he was a guy, he and a couple of other guys, even more so than me, I think were the guys that understood the mall theory about that we were better together. And we would sit there and we would, just like this opportunity, right? We get to sit here today and we get to talk as professionals and talk. And, at some point, maybe some people would even want to listen to us. That was not true of my life 38 years ago. That was not happening. And, one of the things that, and I think this is the funny part, is that, most of my life I would kind of point, or at least up until I started to get sober, I would point to trying to do things where it would be fun, right? And yeah, let's go do this. It's going to be, that's where we're going to glean joy, right? Whether it was going to a great golf course, whether it was going to for a great meal, whether it was going to a great concert, whatever it was, if I was directed to, hey, let's go have some fun. And the truth of the matter is that kind of created a lot of not fun, right? That created a lot of pain. And because again, it's the disease of more, right? I just couldn't get enough of that. And I think that today that, what works for all of us, right, is that we're just going to act in the right way. And if we act in the right way, then joy will come. I got the opportunity yesterday to go speak in an AA meeting, right? And kind of one of the funny things, and it's one of those things like when people ask you to speak, it's usually a couple of months before. It's like, hey, can you show up on the 3rd of November? And it's like, oh, yeah, sure, no problem, sounds great. And then all of a sudden, it's the night of the 2nd, and you're thinking, man, I don't want to go do that, right? And in the ability to. But again, this is the part. This is like kind of chop wood, carry water, right? You can't keep it if you don't give it away. And those are things that when I was in the middle of my drinking and using, where I was so selfish and self-centered that, I couldn't go and do something for somebody else. And I have to tell you guys, I got up yesterday and a friend of mine came and picked me up to go to the meeting with me, and we got there, and the minute that I got to sit down and start connecting with that group, talking to them about things that when I was in their spot I thought were great ideas, right? And then telling them about the solutions, right? The solutions that I found. They might not be the solutions for them, but they're the solutions that I found. And, man, I walked out of that meeting yesterday and I was, I was so jacked, right? I was so jacked up and really joy. And so I think that's the big difference. That kind of hopefully what happens when we get in the middle of the wagon of recovery, that we get out of that kind of self-centered selfishness piece and we're able to, be of help to somebody else, right? Be of service, have faith, be of service. I think those are at least 2 of the pillars of joy.
I think that's true. We were actually, I'm thinking about a podcast, another guest that we had on, and we spent some time talking about, learning to exist without the peaks and the valleys, right? But learning how to kind of exist in that middle area, whatever that is. And yeah, I think, the word that comes to mind when we're talking is, contentment, right? But learning to understand and be okay with, what it feels to be content. And that can be joyful, I think, if we, once we allow ourselves to understand that and to be able to experience that, but that being content, which is the opposite of discontent, I guess, right? Is really joyful. It's a great place to be, but we had to learn how to enjoy that, I guess, right?
Yeah, and I think that, and the truth of the matter is before I got into recovery, and I mean, I was the perfect example of self-will run riot, right? I mean, that's, and there just wasn't enough to either make me content or to keep me content. If, like I said earlier, if a little was good, a lot was better.
Mm-hmm.
And if we were going on this trip and we were going to go for 5 days, I'd be the guy who'd say, "Hey, come on, let's stay for a couple more," right? I just didn't know when to say when.
Yeah.
And, and I think that was really the beauty of like a 12-step recovery. Beyond, I mean, I got into 12-step recovery ostensibly out of the gate to hopefully not go to jail, which failed miserably. But I did get sober. Oh yeah, that part. And so, but I got in there to ostensibly to quit drinking and using, and the truth of the matter is what I found was this plan for living, right? And the beauty of the steps for me is they're linear, right? Okay, do 1, do 2, do 3. I mean, I'd like to think I was this really smart guy, but in many ways I was a simpleton, right? They needed to like draw it out for me. And, and so, and to tell you the truth, I mean, you guys would love this. I get a lot of credit for things that happened at Cirque, and the truth of the matter is that credit needed to go to people like Mike Dussault. That credit needed to go to the 12 steps. That credit needed to go to the team that was there, right? The Beverly Rushes and the Dave Becks and the Richard Losey's and the folks that, and one of the things about it is, and to Justin's point about being content is I think I kind of reached the point where I was content enough to let everybody else have their moment. And I think if you get there, man, it's amazing when people are having their moments that really what miracles happen in a residential treatment facility, right? I mean, literally, it's like the pebble in the pond, right? The ripples just start to go out and everything gets affected in a good way. And so for this, kid who grew up really, and I'm not sure why, right? I came out of a household. My father came to every baseball game I ever played. My mother was a doting mother who, I mean, it was a little embarrassing how doting she was over me at times, right? So I wasn't this kid that came from this broken household or anything like that. I was just a kid who liked to drink, who like I said, if a little fun was great, let's have a lot more. And to get into this program that was to be successful in was all about service, service to others, and really the miracle of treatment. I mean, I don't the listening public that you have, if it's people that are in recovery or people about thinking about getting in recovery, but I remember the first day, I was, talk about a guy who had his heels in the ground about going to a treatment center, right? I mean, that was like, I don't think so. And I remember the very first time I sat in a group, right? And I could look around and it was like I could see in others what I obviously couldn't see in myself. That miracle, right? That miracle of us helping each other. And man, that was like rocket science for a selfish, self-centered kid, right? It's like, oh, I can help you. I can see this. And I was that kid who went to treatment, and I love treatment. I was. I went there. I had some success, uh, and and really all the time where um, I was incarcerated, I thought about coming out and doing a lot of things. My family owned a building supply yard, and I was a kid who grew up, and you know, wealth is relative, but we had lots of privilege, and but the entire time I was there, I thought about maybe working in the treatment center because it had been so transformative for me. Uh, and it's a funny thing. You put it out there in the universe, and good things happen, right? So
That's right.
yeah.
That's so funny because I didn't know anything about recovery, treatment, nothing. And I went to treatment and paid attention so it would go by fast. And then I loved being in treatment too. I was ready to go when it was time to go, but I loved it. I mean, I had a spiritual experience in treatment. I saw that there were doctors and nurses and therapists and recovery advocates and cooks and everything, but it never occurred to me that there needed to be people out there talking about this.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had been sober a couple of years, and this opportunity came my way. And to your point earlier, to the guy asking what are you saying to these people, and when they were explaining this job to me, I just said, wait, so I would go around the country and talk about being in recovery and get to play golf every now and then, but I don't really sell anything, but I just talk about it. And they said, yeah. And I was like, well, that sounds pretty good. And then it's taken on a life of its own since then. But that's kind of it. I mean, I just go around and talk about what it's done for me mostly, and it's
and
changed my life from the inside out.
Yeah, and to your point, V, that was the thing that was the miraculous piece about Mike, right? Mike Dussault, he ended up getting his PhD, and a brilliant guy, right? Totally a brilliant guy. But I don't think it was anything that he really said to me as much as it was how he acted, right? And that's the part about being able to, act rightly, and all of a sudden it was, and here I had all these friends, and I certainly wasn't the only alcoholic in our group, but, and pretty soon somebody would say, I want what he has. And, and that becomes, you become the personification of what recovery looks like. And ultimately it is attractive. We always used to say that recovery is a program of attraction. It was one of the things that became a big mantra for us at Cirque. We had a lot of cool amenities there, right? But the amenities were just, it was like, look, this looks fun, right? This looks attractive. And if I can't tell you how many guys that came to Cirque, and the very first time they'd come to the lodge, when I got sober, you guys, we got sober on the psych units, or we got sober in the basements of churches, or it wasn't. Let's just say it wasn't the prime real estate, in a hospital by any means. I remember bringing people in, and we'd get them to the front door of the lodge, and they'd look up and they'd say, "This is it?" And I'd say, "This is it." And they'd say, "Well, I can probably do this." And and I think that's what we need to do as an industry, right? We need to show people how attractive that this recovery really is. And it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be the bells and whistles. It's kind of like B was talking about. They don't really pay us to go out and talk about it, but they do pay us to go out and represent it. And this is what recovery looks like in every facet of my life. And it's just not drinking and using. It's, it's making sure that I'm impeccable with my word. It's that I'm not late, right? That I'm not the guy who thinks my time is more valuable than your time. What a random act of kindness can really do. And I think that's what we find in 12-step programs from people who typically weren't randomly kind, or people who weren't typically on time, or people who typically weren't impeccable with their words.
Yeah, I love that. When I was maybe I was 3 or 4 months sober, and I used to go to a meeting that doesn't exist anymore called Nooners, and came in there one day and right at noon. And after the meeting, I was talking to this guy. He said, "Hey, are you chronically late everywhere you go?" I said, "No, but I'm chronically barely on time." And he said, "I want you to try something. Try being 15 minutes early everywhere you go and see what happens. If you want self-esteem, do esteemable things." I said, "Okay,
Yeah.
okay." And so I tried that, and I feel like every time I talk, especially on here, there's something that happened for me in the last 6 years and change that was the most important thing ever, other than getting sober. And this is definitely one of them. And because what I realized after almost no time at all of just trying to be early everywhere, because sometimes I would try and then not be super early, but I would at least be on time, is it eliminated so much stress from my life.
Good.
And I realized that those little pockets of 5 minutes here, 2 minutes there, it was causing so much stress. And once I was started to try to be early everywhere, and worst case be on time, I could enjoy waking up, prayer, meditation, taking a shower, getting dressed, driving to wherever I was going, whatever it is. I was at peace instead of scrambling. I mean, I used to, before I got sober, I had to be at work at 8:30. I would wake up at 8:15, take a shower, and drive 12 minutes to my job, and would be total bat out of hell with two off-brand Pedialyte Chili Willies to try to beat my hangover, driving into the parking garage, flying through Raleigh. That's no way to live. I mean, forget what I was doing the night before. I mean, just that the stress of being late everywhere, barely on time everywhere was enough to drive somebody crazy.
Mm.
And then the other thing you said too, I mean, is, that's it's the ultimate, because everything else is just stuff, but but the most valuable thing we can give anybody is our time. And then if we don't value other people's time, when I'm late somewhere, that's whether I mean to or not, I'm telling you, I don't value your time as much as I value my own.
Right.
Yeah, amen. It's a funny piece. We talk about, I don't, it's like I said, I grew up in this really kind of idyllic household in a little idyllic neighborhood. And so, I always for a long time tried to figure out, why did I drink and use like a freaking madman, right? And and the truth of the matter is like, it tamped back, as I talked about earlier, sort of tamped back that fear, that insecurity, that anxiety. And one of the things about, and again, I had I got the advice from a person who was pretty influential in my life about be 15 minutes early instead of 15 minutes late. Actually, he said it's just as easy to be 15 minutes early as it is to be 15 minutes late. And that's true. That was a truism, right? And, but the fact of the matter is all of a sudden I had less anxiety, right? I had less that urge to fix that, right? And then, and I think that was, so I don't think I ever, knew why I drank and used like I did. And, and I guess I'm one of those guys who I don't really care how the watch works. I just care what time it is. So, at the end of the day, I'm just grateful I'm sober, right? And so, and I know that if I do certain things, still today, still 38 years in, it's the difference between 38 years in and 3 months in is today I look at it like I get to go to a meeting. I don't have to go to a meeting. Back in those days, I you felt like, well, I had to, sorry, I've got to go to this meeting, right? Like, and it was funny. I was, and Mike would always say to me, because the big piece in early in recovery is, you need to go to 90 meetings in 90 days, right? And Mike would say, well, that's just BS. And he said, you need to go to 365 meetings in 365 days. And I'll never forget, he said to me, it was great, right? He didn't actually say it to me. He was talking to the group. And he said, just think about this. This was 4th-stage cancer. And somebody said, hey, you can put this in remission by just going to a meeting every day for the next year. Would we do it? And the truth of the matter is absolutely. He'd probably show up and set up the chairs and make the coffee and wear his coat and tie, right? It's like, is this going to put, we would. But with
Yeah.
chemical dependency, it's like, oh my goodness, this meeting is
Yeah,
tonight at
right.
7 o'clock. And then the better part, right, is they all get there. And, all of a sudden they get about, we've taken years, I pretty much had destroyed my life for 15 years up to the time I went to treatment. And it's like 30 days. You want me to stay here for 30 days, right? And it was just, just the funniest stuff. And that really we ought to do a sitcom about that, right? It's like, no, I've
I hear you.
overreacted
I've
here.
thought
Yeah.
about it. Believe me.
Yeah,
That's
I've
the truth.
overreacted. Yeah. So
We talk about that kind of stuff a lot, because being, kind of in the position that we are is that we're, literally 100% of the individuals that we work with, they're in that beginning stage of the recovery or treatment process. So there's a lot of that, and yeah, I mean, we talk about that a lot. I mean, if it was any other illness, right? If it was cancer, or if it was, you name it, some kind of, medical condition, it would be viewed totally different if we're sitting there saying, yeah, exactly to your point, Gary. You need to, it's in your best interest to go to do this 30-day treatment program, or, at least be willing to do an IOP if you're not willing to do anything else. And a lot of times the response that we get is, yeah, like we're asking them to, do something insurmountable. And it's like, yeah, if this was any other medical condition, of course you would do that, right? You would do the chemo, you would do this, you would do whatever it takes. But the conversation looks totally different when it's around substance abuse treatment, right?
it
And if only they
seems
knew.
to.
And that's the thing. And I think that's
Yeah.
our job, right? Is that we try to show them a window into, like, it's easy for most people to agree that, like, something needs to change. I think, if you've gotten to the point where you're coming to a detox or you're having a conversation with somebody about residential treatment, there's, I think most people can identify that probably need to change something in my life right now. And I guess that's where our role and our responsibility comes in, is to show them, like, hey, if you're willing to do the work, right? If you're willing to do the work, life absolutely does not have to look like this. There's a whole different scenario out there waiting for you.
Yeah, and like both of you just said, show. Try to show, not
right.
wag a finger and tell.
That's right.
Show.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Gary, you're definitely you show a lot of people what life in recovery is like, and it's a beautiful thing to see, because when I think of you, I just think of somebody who is full of joy. I do,
Well, that's kind stuff, right? I mean, and it's, we talk a lot about that when we very first get into recovery. We have this idea about what life can, maybe might look like, and of course, the truth of the matter is that if that was, it's so much beyond that, right? It's gone so much past, to be able to sit here and have, friends from North Carolina say, hey, Gary, do you want to be on this, do you want to be on this podcast? It's a miracle, right? Or to have, the gentleman who owns the lodge say, hey, would you consider, like, taking an emeritus role? That stuff wasn't, that really wasn't in my mind 38 years ago. Like I said, I was really tired of hurting my family. That for sure might have been the biggest driver for me to, I just knew that whatever was going on, I just couldn't stop it. And if you would have told me that, hey, we were going to go stack BBs in the corner and that was going to get me sober, and more importantly, not hurt my family any longer, then I was, that would have been good enough. But the fact of the matter is that, so to have this life today and that's, I guess that's the appeal I would give to your listeners is, I got there and I really had not much to lose, right? It was just, in fact, I remember, I'll leave you guys with this story, right? And I was in this treatment center and I had this I wasn't going to make my bed, right? And today, this is kind of a famous story about a guy who gave a commencement speech at the University of Texas. But the truth of the matter is this: I heard this many years before that speech in a treatment center, and I would, I wouldn't make my bed, right? This is how petulant I was at the time and how childish. And he and I remember walking down and I sat in this gentleman's office, and he looked at me and he said, "What's the story about the bed?" And I looked at him and I said, "You know something, Ed, if you can tell me why making my bed or will keep me sober," I said, I'm happy to make my bed." And I remember he looked at me and he held his thumb and his forefinger about this far apart, you guys. And he said, he goes, he said, "Well, first of all," he says, "you're not really in a position, you don't have a lot of leverage here, right?" Yeah, which was true, right? So, but he said, "I'll tell you what," he said, "if you make your bed for the next 60 days, he said, I'll tell you the reason you make your bed." And, what he was really doing was he was giving me a gracious way out, right? He wasn't going to embarrass me. And that's really another thing I think comes with the 12 steps of recovery, is grace. And so 60 days later, I'm getting ready to leave the treatment center, and he said, "Hey, Ed wants to see you." And I said, "Oh, okay." And literally, I go down to his office, and I'm so grandiose that I think he's going to say to me, "Hey, you did a great job, right? You worked really hard." And so I sit in there waiting for my kudos, right? And he said, "So do you want to know?" And I looked at him and I said, "Do I want to know what?" And he said, "Do you want to know why you make your bed?" And I go, "Oh, yeah, what was that all about, right?" And he said, "Well, first of all," he said, "your life's pretty chaotic. And if it gets chaotic enough," he said, "your default will be to drink and use." And he said, "So you need to start this routine in the morning, right? You need to change your routine in the morning." And he said, "The other part, so you get up, you make your bed, you say your prayers, you lay out what you're going to do during the day." And he said, "By 10:30, he said, I don't know, maybe it's all gone awry, right? You got your hair on fire." He said, but if you don't start with a plan," he said, it's not going to get any better from there." And then he said, secondly, you come back from this chaotic day and you come in and your bed's made and the world's in order, right? And I looked at him and I said, "Ed," I said, "makes sense to me." He said, I said, "Why didn't you just tell me that?" And he said, "Because that's faith." And he said, "I'm going to tell you a lot of things that probably won't make a lot of sense about staying sober. And you just have to know that I have no agenda for you other than for you to get better." And I think over the years, I bet you I showed a couple hundred people how to make a bed. And, and I think nothing really exemplified recovery more than that being of service and that simple message, faith over fear. So, any rate, that's pretty much the story.
Gary, thank you. What a great way to end it. And just cannot thank you enough for being here today. That was great. Thank you, Justin. And hope to see you soon. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Gary. It's
All
great
right,
meeting you.
gentlemen. Thanks for having me.